First time. First time. Are you in film?
It's weird.
Should we go get this?
He's here?
I mean, he said his messenger, is he?
Sweet. Philip, Maura.
You messaging?
There you go.
Yes, you're.
You have to be recorded.
You can just at this point.
Zach, you always look so stoned on camera.
I guess they just like permanently made me that way in college, even though I don't smoke anymore. Okay, so I posted the warm up in Slack, so we'll do that for about another 3 to 5 minutes, and then we'll get going.
I'm gonna go get.
Wait, you need someone to bring.
Yeah. I think somebody. Yeah.
So, 1, 2, say there's an PowerShell.
No, did you install?
No, we're supposed to.
Yeah, yeah, it's okay. We'll get it, we'll just have to get it set up right next month. PowerShell's like a Windows. PowerShell's like a Windows specific
No, thank you.
and it's terrible. And most devs
Mind the correcting chair?
use your Mac
There's
version.
one of them.
Oh, you don't have to be all the way on the corner.
Windows now the ability to run Linux.
That's awesome.
God, yesterday was like,
So that it's called Windows Subsystem Linux, and it just lets you like
That's what I told him.
Ubuntu's a Linux.
Like I said, like something like that.
oh, God.
How did you get to the third class?
Like actually, she said.
We tried to wait as long as possible. Yeah.
That's my bad.
No, you're good.
I can't remember what I was saying. There's something like that was, I didn't expect that.
Yeah.
I think most people that are really.
Like, I didn't think they were gonna do that.
Thursday, we looked up, like, what all we need to get done. And then we called up places, and the place we got married at, they called up, they were like, "Hey, what's the earliest you can do this?" And they said, "We're taking walk-ins tomorrow."
Like, okay, we'll be there.
So there's like actually like a wedding happening there, and 2 of them were our witnesses. They signed our paper.
Were you there witnesses also? Or
No,
did
they had like 15 people there. It was like some old people getting married, and then there was like 4 people behind us just waiting in line. It was super weird.
Hey, that was the.
I'm, forgot
Dude,
Zach,
you
and
showed
I
up
sitting in
Show me the money,
the yard,
money, and we were like,
the first time I
"Oh,
was here.
thanks, this is the new.
Good for you.
The copyright company has it.
Yeah,
You know,
but anything counts.
anything at
Yeah.
this point.
And if you ever, you probably won't ever go to this place, but building it's in. It's like all under construction and everything. You go in the elevator and some of the lights on the elevator buttons don't work, and that really stressed me out because I thought we were gonna like
Yeah.
crash and die.
A sketchy elevator or something. That's crazy. That is awesome. What a good story.
yeah.
through it. Yeah.
My mom, I told her, and she goes, oh.
That's awesome. How long, like, have you been an idea?
Since March,
Okay, so you thought of it.
yeah.
That's cool. So, yeah. That'll be mine. Right.
Well, we're gonna have like 2 brothers in that.
There you go.
My sister said, I have a son now. No, like I have another son. Because I have a son. And I was like, do we tell Jack that he said that?
Jack. What is Jack? Jack's just a.
Jack's just a thing. See if Kaylee's ever gonna find him.
Is she coming back over?
I hope so, she has my keys.
Are they looking for each other?
Yeah.
Up, but that's a cat battery line.
Nice. Do we need trade signs?
It might reach in there.
Well, you can move the circuit a little bit.
Oh, yeah. Then you don't have to flop those. Maybe
There's, I think if you move it.
And you can move 0.
There's no one in.
So I think.
What?
I've got my Slack account.
What is this? This is just a.
Oh, that is a.
It's a circuit breaker.
Can you move it up one?
I guess I could have. Is anyone gonna die if I put this?
Not like immediately. I don't. Oh. I don't know if it. I can't look that up. Oh, actually. rrockers at Gmail.
Yeah, so I agree. I did nothing on the front end.
I'm so sorry, looking.
So, but it works. It takes
That's all
a-
that-
Sorry, gang, we've got some lost students.
Nice.
Oh,
We'll
that's
start
nice.
on back.
On the outside.
But
They're,
I like.
it sounds like they're running around the
It's just such a headache.
The building.
building trying to find each other.
Because yours looks pretty. Or, I guess I don't know.
You look like a lost
That's
program.
right.
Yeah, I uploading just an image to the background makes me like immediately just prettier.
That's what I needed. Yeah.
I was gonna do it to where if you clicked each one, it took you to like a picture of like, I was like, no, it's just gonna be Hogwarts
Just
forever.
too much. It's awesome.
I'm in class.
I don't think he knows.
What?
That's always my biggest fear. I'll be like, it's all
There was
going
a-
on.
yesterday,
Well, one time I
like,
like cleared my throat at like one of the first classes and I realized that I wasn't muted and I was like, I'm gonna die, so.
What's up, Bill? Is it Phil or Philip?
Any.
Nice to meet you, Dave.
First instructor, okay, better than Phil. Yeah. Okay. All right, let's get going. Last class, module 3, the hardest module, hopefully. Here we go. So, all right, the warm-up was just exercising some of the stuff from the pre-reading, which was that command line book. You weren't supposed to read the whole book, but if you did, that's great. So on Windows, some of you have installed the Windows subsystem Linux, and so you can open the terminal. It's like called Ubuntu, but Ubuntu is like a Linux OS, and whenever you run that, it just gives you a command line that's like the commands that you use are specific to that operating system, but it's like actually talking to your Windows computer. So it's like a really weird situation, but it's like it's if you're a developer on a Windows laptop, that's typically what people end up doing. On Mac, you can just open the terminal. So if you just do command space and type terminal, you'll get typically that result. A lot of developers on Mac use something called iTerm, which is just like, it's the same thing as the terminal, but it's just like a little bit, there's like more customization and stuff you can do with it. You can make it like different colors and yada yada. So either of those works. So I'm gonna open iTerm though, just because that's what I use, but you have to install that if you want it.
Do you need to be recording?
I think I am actually.
Oh, okay.
That's the first thing I did, but thank you. For once. So whenever you open the terminal, you get just this black screen or white screen or purple screen on Ubuntu. And it's just waiting for you to tell it to do something. Whenever you tell the command line to do something, sometimes it matters where you are on your computer, and sometimes it doesn't. So there are certain commands you can run anywhere on the computer. And so for one example, Node is just a program that you have installed on your computer. And so no matter where you are, no matter what directory you're in, you can run Node. And wherever you are, you can also run the first answer to the exercise, which is, how do you find out what directory you're currently in? What's the command for that? Yeah, does anybody know what that stands for? So yeah, PWD. And the reason that everything's like acronyms like this is just because you have to type everything. So no one wants to type that much, right? So yeah, that's how you find out where you are. And so you just get, like, when you type a command, and you typically just get like a text response as the answer. And that's the terminal. It's just like typing stuff and then reading the output of that command. So this is saying, hey, you're in the users. So the slash at the very beginning is like the root directory. So there's like the first directory is called root. And then typically you always do stuff within a user profile though. So then there's the users, and then there's my profile, Zachary Mays. And then I have a code folder where I do all the coding that I do. And then I have an OK Coders folder, and then I've got a curriculum folder. So that's where I am right now, is within that curriculum folder. How do I find out what's in this folder? Yeah, so just LS. So that, yeah, list, I think, I actually don't even know what that stands for. I think it's a list. So it's showing me the folders and the files that are in the current directory. And then if I want to move to the module 3 folder, how do I do that? CD. And then specifically, if I want to move to module 3, what do I have to do with CD to move there? Yeah. So CD, and then CD is the program or the command we want to run, but it actually takes arguments. So like it can take, like with, you put a space and then now it's like, okay, wait, where do you want to go? You want to change directory, but where? So this is like, there's like the command and then there's like additional arguments you can pass it. So yeah, we're going to go to module 3. And so you want to use tab all the time because tab will autocomplete for you if it has enough information. So the only stuff in my folder that start with M are the 3 folders, module 1, module 2, module 3. And so if I type M and then hit tab, it's going to go, well, I at least know it's one of these 3 things. So I'm going to fill up to the point where you then need to give me more information. And so I want 3, so then I type 3, and then now I'm done. So yeah, try to use tab as much as possible, because if you're mistyping something and you hit tab and it's like there's nothing there, you'll find out really quickly like that you didn't type it. So yeah, change directory to module 3. So now if I do pwd again, I was at that full path that I was at before, but now I've moved 1 folder deeper into the file system. If I want to go back or up, you want to think of the file system as sort of like this, like kind of like this. So if I want to go like up a node or up a spot in my file system, does anybody know what that command is? So say that one more time. Yeah, so it's still CD, and then the argument that we pass to it is ... You actually don't need to slash the end of it, but it'll still work. Yeah.
Vacuum, why that?
Yeah, it's up there. Yeah.
Oh,
It's weird.
you would think it would.
So you guys have seen us or one of the instructors use dot a lot to reference the current directory, and dot means the parent directory. So it's just like, that's actually just like a shortcut to make it easier to move around. Dot is just a reference to the, well, let's not learn about the actual way it works, but so CD dot means move up. You can actually chain this. You can say dot slash dot to move up twice if you want to. But I actually never do that. I always just go up and then ls and then pwd and then do it again. All right. Oh yeah, and then last, if you type CD and hit enter and don't pass it anything else, does anybody know what happens?
Goes back to the user.
Yeah, it goes to your home directory. So like if at any point you're like, I need to like sort of reset where I'm at, you just do CD without any command. And you can actually see one thing, so a lot of people don't like typing pwd all the time. So a lot of times the prompt actually will put the directory you're in, so you don't have to type it. So you can actually see this tilde. That is also an alias to your home directory. So like dot is a reference to your current directory, dot is a reference to the directory above, and then the tilde is a reference to your user directory. So yeah, that's for me, user Zachary Mays. So CD takes me there. If I am in this code folder, I can also do CD tilde, and that's the same thing, saying go to the home directory. So those are both equivalent. And you'll sometimes see people use paths that are like tilde slash code slash okcoders. Okay, there was, in the pre-work, there was a section in it that just had some of the most common commands. Yeah, so they have this list here, the most common commands. So cd, ls, pwd, top 3 commands that you'll use. Then you'll probably eventually start using maker and like remove and move potentially, but a lot of times, honestly, most people just do that inside VS Code because you can like make files and folders in VS Code. So a lot of people like use the command line to just like get to the project they want to work on, run the project, and then from there they're like, all right, from here on out, I'm just gonna use my text editor, my VS Code, and like almost everybody uses VS Code now. There used to be like everybody used different stuff, and you would like configure it and do all this stuff, and then VS Code just started like just destroying the market. Just everybody uses it now. So yeah, a lot of these other commands I wouldn't really worry about. I would just worry about being able to move around on your computer. Okay. All right, so why do we need the command line? Like, this is something you really actually have to know. Yes, you do really need to know how to use it. And the reason why, regardless of which path you take, front end, back end, or full stack, we use the command line to run and create and modify the projects that we work on. So in the case of like, let's just say a purely front end project, a React project, which is what we'll be doing in the next module. To develop a React project, you still use the command line. So you would go to that project. If it's a new project, you would use the command line to like set up the templating and set up the project. And then once you have that templated and set up, like a basic minimum React project, you would then use the command line to run the commands to actually develop in the project. And so we've used so far, whenever we've done front end stuff, we've, just did it inside VS Code and then did that live server extension. And live server was something that, looked at the files we had and then served them to the browser. And then if you save, does it automatically refresh the browser? Yeah, that's another function of live server. So when you do a React project, we use this thing called Create React App, which is this project that makes it really easy to create React apps. And it has all the tooling and like all these like niceties that devs like to have whenever they're working on a project. So instead of using live server, you run a command in Create React App that's like, I want to develop this right now. And so the command for that is typically npm start or npm run dev or something like that. And it basically is the live server of React. But you can't run that from VS Code. You have to run that from the terminal. Now you can actually run a terminal in VS Code, but it's still a terminal. So you can have like everything in VS Code, and then I can like, there's like a command where I can say new terminal, and I get this like terminal in VS Code. But that's the exact same thing as like the separate program terminal that I was using. It's just like embedded into VS Code. So you can choose what you would prefer, but it might be just biased, but I prefer to use the separate command line just because I want to allocate more space to the code and not like have that extra window. So that's why you need the command line. And just to give, because there's programs that only run from the command line that you use as a developer. There's no GUI for it. So just to give you a typical example of like what a day looks like for me, for any developer, is I open the command line and I decide what I want to work on. So am I working on OK Coders or am I working on this other thing? And I cd to where those projects are, which are just folders on my computer. And then I run a command to start development mode, whatever that is. So if it's a front end thing, that means, create a server for the React project watch if I change any of the files and automatically refresh the browser for me. So I can start like changing a web page, see the results of changing it. And then if I'm like, okay, that's all I had to do for today, then I stop that script, that developed script that's doing what I just described. And then I say, okay, show me what the changes are with Git. So I typically use Git in the command line, but you can also use it with GitHub Desktop. That's something relatively new. Pretty much everybody used Git from the command line in recent years, but they've created that GUI and that's getting more and more popular. But so you'll see some people do the command line for Git, some people use the GUI for it. But either way, you then look at your changes and make sure they make sense. And then you say, okay, now I'm going to push those, save and push those changes to GitHub. And then you're done. And then you just do that again the next day. So that's like, you're not really doing much necessarily on the command line as a front-end dev, except for, moving around, running your project, and then also like installing other stuff. So we haven't used NPM that much, but if you're working on a project and all of a sudden they're like, hey, we need to like email people now, you don't just like write all that code from scratch. There's like an NPM node or front-end package that like someone's written that like makes it really easy to do that. So you would install that package. So you're often like installing stuff and then coding, running a project. Yeah. So that's a front-end example. Backend pretty similar, but instead of running like a thing that's going to serve to the browser, it's like running a script that's going to do something. Or you're running a script that's going to start a server that will just like listen to traffic on the internet. So in that minimum kind of simple use case I just described, which is typically the workflow you'll do as like a junior developer, the only really stuff you need to know from the command line is just how to move around and run a simple script to start developing. So it's not too bad. Okay, any questions? Okay, so at the end of class, with whatever time we have left, I'll actually show you guys what it looks like to start a new project from scratch, a React project actually, just so you can get a taste of what's going to happen in the next module and just kind of show you that workflow real quick. Okay, so a few of you did the weather front end project. And I don't think anybody did the node project. And so I want to talk, which is totally fine. I want to talk a little bit about like why we would do a project in Node versus why we would do a project in the browser. So for the Node project that we had, you're supposed to hit like a social media API that had like users and posts and stuff like that. Forget about that and just keep thinking about the weather API. So we had a weather API and allowed you to, over the internet, ask what the current weather is in a particular city. Pretty cool, right? So you can talk to that from the browser. So you guys wrote code that whenever you run that code in the browser is going to go talk to that API and get the current weather. That use case of doing it in the browser means essentially like the only way it's going to get used is by somebody opening that page in the browser with their phone or with their computer. And it's just, one person going to it, looking at it, and then closing it. There's like nothing else you can do, right? There may be tons of other use cases that you want to do related to that API. So just for example, like what if you wanted to send a Slack message to yourself each morning with the current weather, or you wanted to send an email to somebody with the weather, or any other sort of non-browser based thing. Like, can anybody think of another example besides like of what you may want to do with that weather information that isn't related to just looking at it in the browser? Yeah.
So one way we use it a lot is for messaging, so across email and SMS and push, like live content that has APIs that get called on the back end. So it's not a web browser, but they're opening an email on the back end and like refreshes that data every time.
Yeah,
Could you also like send it, like if you had like a Twilio account, like make it text you the weather every morning or something?
totally. Yeah. Honestly, like anything you can think of, you can do. And so you brought up Twilio. So there's anything you think of, you can do and like write it yourself in Node, but then you can also like just pay a company that's already written it. And it's like way easy to get up and running by just using their service. So Twilio, I think, is all they do is text messaging, or do they do other stuff?
I've only ever looked at the texting part.
Yeah.
To text myself some cat facts.
Yeah. So yeah, Twilio makes it really easy to send texts. And like a lot of these companies like that are what are called like API based companies, where like they're mainly trying to sell to developers and other companies that want to like automate sending, in this case, text messages, or send MailChimp's for automating sending emails. And they provide an API. And so if we look at Twilio, and go to there, you'll see like they've got like a developers tab. And like most of this is like sign up and start building, like most of it's like oriented around like a developer using it. And yeah, so they do, it seems like they do more than just messaging actually. But if we go to this developers tab and we do SMS documentation, it's like, hey, send SMSs with Twilio. And then you can see, because JavaScript is so freaking popular, like their first example is actually JavaScript code. Like this should make some sense to you, like they're just assigning something to a variable. And then this is server code. So this shouldn't make sense until the final module. But they are not just for JavaScript. You can actually see they've got all the other languages available. So we can look at the Node.js quick start, and like they give you examples of how to use their service in Node. So yeah, there's so many different things you may want to do with weather data. You may be a weather analytics company that wants to pull the weather and store it and then run some sort of analysis on it. And all that sort of work is not something that would happen in the browser. It would be something that happens on like a schedule that just runs on a computer. Like it just pulls the information and then it might save it in a database, or it might analyze it and send it in a report that the company needs or something like that. So there's all this sort of like magic work that happens. Like when you use Uber, you like see the front end, but there's like all this like crazy processes that are happening in the background. And that's all stuff that would happen if they were a purely JavaScript shop. A lot of that would be happening in Node, like just running on their servers to like process information, like figure out who should drive for you. And then they're like, oh, this one should drive. So then send the message to that driver. So I think like one of the things I was thinking about showing you guys today is, so we can pull the weather API in Node, and then I think pretty quickly just like send a message to our Slack channel with the weather. And so I can just kind of show what that looks like. But the processes of doing that is essentially like, what's the thing you want to do? So you want to send a message in Slack. And so you then like type in Google Node, send a message to Slack, and then you'll get like, here's the documentation on how to do that. And then as a developer, most of the time you're just like reading documentation, copying code, pasting it into the thing you need, and then like slightly changing it to do what you need. So yeah, like all the like magic business stuff. A lot of it's like back-end node type stuff. Any questions about that? Okay, all right, so let's try and do this Slack message. So I'm gonna go to, oh, this is kind of cool. I'll show you this. So like I'm so often going to the same folder all the time, you can actually create your own commands. And so I have a command that's cd cok. So change directory to the code, the OK coders folder is what that means in my head. And so that's a custom command I made that just CDs directly to the current folder. So, all right, I'm in there now, and then not everybody has this. I don't think you have to install it, but if you want to open this current folder in VS Code, there's a command you can run, which is code and then dot, meaning this directory. So this is just saying open this directory in VS Code. So that just like saved me the like little time it would take me to open VS Code and say open folder and then going to that folder. All right, so I'm making a new folder called node weather Slack. And then I'm just gonna make index.js and do all the code in there. And then copy some of this weather code from day 6. Okay, so this code from day 6 was for the browser. And the context we're in now is we want to do this in Node. Okay, so what in here is browser specific that you guys can identify?
The window on the.
Yep. Yeah, like document.get element by ID, this event listener, inner.text or inner text. Yeah, a lot of this is browser specific, but this here, like the fetch, like and getting the JSON from the API that we can reuse in Node. So I'm gonna delete all this HTML specific stuff. I'm then just using Devin's key, which a lot of I was glad some of you guys looked up. Like, is that a security violation? Like, does someone just use my API key now? So totally, no one's looking at your GitHub probably, or mine. But if someone did, the my key's there and they can use it however they want. Now, the worst case scenario is basically that company that gave us the API would just like shut our account down if we started using it too much. But if you are a company and like you have an API key to Twilio that allows sending text messages to customers, and someone found your key in GitHub because it's like public repo, they can then just like send text messages to your customers. So it is really important not to put sensitive keys like that in your code. Even if it's a private repo, just because you want to like be as secure as possible. And so the way that we do that is through what's called typically environment variables, which get set only on the like server where the code is running. But that's kind of an advanced topic that you guys don't need to worry about quite yet. So yes, I am using Devin's key, but like it's not a huge deal in this case. All right, so we have our API key, we have the endpoint that we want to talk to get the weather. And then we've got this function that's gonna get the weather. And so I actually need to call it. Because we define it, but we don't actually call it anymore because before we had that like, event listener on the button. So I'm gonna go ahead and call it. And then, I don't know if you guys remember, but fetch is something defined in the browser by default, but in Node, it's not. At least it's actually is in the latest version of Node that came out, but not in the version of Node that I'm running. So we actually have to install fetch. And I'm trying to remember.
It was like frosting.
Yeah, because like this one didn't really work, it seemed like. Okay, and then just one thing for you guys to know. So if you're ever trying to find like something for Node or browser JavaScript that's like like another library or like another package or some sort of thing you're trying to install, you nowadays usually GitHub is the best place to start. So I typically, so I'm searching for a library and I get an npm result, which is the Node package manager, but I also get a GitHub result. And then you might also get like their own custom documentation website. If it's like a big enough package, they'll spend the time to make their own documentation for it. But I typically like to start with GitHub because if they do have documentation, they'll link me to it on the README. So this is the GitHub repo for Crossfetch. The code for it is in this repo, but they also know that most people coming to this repo are people that want to use it. And so they'll have a README with like how to get going with it. And then if they did have their own docs, they'd give you a link to the docs.
So if you have like a couple different Node packages that do similar things, like, and you have developers who have used one before and are like, this really is not what you want to use, you can use the other, like, how would you make that determination versus having to go through all that for yourself to figure it out?
Yeah, I mean, there's people that'll be opinionated and like argue about it. If you don't know, like if you don't have an idea, then you would just trust the other person on your team, if that's what they're saying. But if for some reason you're like, no, like I know about this other one, it's better for this and this and this reason, like hopefully you can like logically
I'm
explain
thinking
it.
like if nobody on the team, like if it's.
Yeah, if nobody knows.
To something like community wise, like where would you go to try and get a feel for?
Yeah, so if I typically look at how many stars, so you can see how many people use a repo. So there's stars just means people like it, is all that is. So that doesn't mean, it means something, but it just means people click that button. There's also typically how many people worked on it, which can be a sign of like a lot of people are working on this, which is good. It's not just one dude that might just stop working on it one day or one female. And then a lot of times if it's used quite a bit, there'll be something called used by. I don't know why this one doesn't have that, but like if we go to the React GitHub. You can see this has 200,000 stars. It has almost 2,000 contributors and it's used by 10.2 million people or organizations, which just means how many like repos have this installed. That's basically what that means. So like, if you're choosing between like, hey, this does it too. If I don't know anything about it, I'll like, okay, well, like how many people are working on it? How many stars does it have? And if there's like a huge difference, then I'm going to use the one that's more popular because it's going to be more documented. But if it's then like, if it's like kind of neck and neck, then I'll try to like read the examples and see like which one looks better to me. And then you just sort of make a judgment call. And then you might start using one and dig into it and then be like, oh, it's terrible. And then try the other one. So yeah, that is like a common thing that you're doing as a dev is like evaluating which library you want to use.
That's all.
So yeah, for some reason, we ended up using crossfetch, and so I'm just gonna use it. And you can see they give you the command to install it there. So yeah, I typically just copy it, that command, and then paste it and run it. So this is saying npm install, and then the save means add it to the package JSON. In the current version of npm that we all probably have, that actually happens by default now. So you don't have to put save, but it's fine to put it. And then you'll also see people, because we're lazy and they don't want to type install, you'll see people do npm I, which just is a shorthand for install. So you'll see when you're reading the docs, you'll see a mix of that. You'll see npm install crossfetch, npm I crossfetch, npm install save crossfetch, and it's like it's all the same thing. All right, so I'm going to copy that, and then I need to install that library only for the project that I'm on right now. I only need it for that. So like running that command, I can run it anywhere, but I want to run it where my project is because I'm installing it for my project. I have like tons of different node projects. Not all of them need crossfetch, right? So it matters where I put it. And so I need to look where I am. And I need to move to module 3, and then I need to move to day 8, and then I need to move to node other Slack. And now I want to run that command. So I'll paste that in. And if you install something and you don't have a package JSON yet, if you haven't done npm init yet, it'll just do it for you. And so now I have. Oh, that's interesting. It doesn't auto make a package JSON. Oh, it would. Wonder if when I do save. So you don't need to worry about what a package lock is. Just let it be. But if we need, you'll typically want a package JSON to track what things you've installed. And so you make one by doing npm init. And then you just hit enter a bunch, so it stops asking you questions. And then now I have a package JSON, and if I run that command again, the install, it's going to add crossfetch as a dependency to my project for me. So you can see in VS Code, if we go back to this folder, we've got our package JSON, and it has this dependencies object, and it's got hey, you installed crossfetch version 3.1.5. Because you'll end up on a big project, you'll have like 50 dependencies. And like, if for some reason all of a sudden your node modules folder got destroyed or you're starting the project fresh, you need to have all those dependencies tracked so that you can easily install all of them in the project. So this is our one dependency. And at this point, we need to import crossfetch to get our stuff to work. So we need to do, I think it's const fetch equals wire crossfetch. I think that's right. But I'll go look at the docs real quick to just make sure that's what they said. And unfortunately, in JavaScript, we currently have like 2 different styles of importing stuff. And if you're using Node raw, which that probably doesn't make any sense to you. The way we're using Node at the moment, which is a very simple way, when you get into more complicated projects, they can do all this like fancy stuff to like make it so that Node can do different types of import styles that are more common, but we're not in a fancy project at the moment. So this is how we have to import it. But we will see when we use React and when we use Express, which is the framework we use for the final module for doing servers, we'll actually import it this way. But for now, we got to do it with this. So that's what I did. Const fetch equals require crossfetch, which just says, hey, go get the crossfetch code and then assign it to this variable so that I can use it. And so I think if we run this now, oh, look, so I'm calling the function that's not there anymore, so that'll give us an error. But I just want to just see if I'm getting the data. So I'm just going to console log the data. And let's try to run this program. How do I run this program in Node? Yep, and notice like I can do tab completion on that. Like I'm typing in the file and I can hit tab. All right, cool. So it's always amazing when stuff works your first try. But I'm console logging the response we're getting from calling the weather API. And so we're getting that JSON payload that's automatically being, is it being auto turned into, it's like, I didn't have to do like JSON parse, I don't think. So we have our JavaScript object. And so let's just let's like create the string for the message we want to send to Slack. So when we send a message to Slack, like it's just going to be text in Slack, right? So we need to create like what we want our message to be. So I think I'm going to do something like, I'm going to make a new function that's like make message from weather data, a nice descriptive name function. And this will take in as a parameter the data. So I'm just going to do a parameter called data. And then we'll do we want this to be a nice function that actually returns something. So we'll do return and then use our template string to say like in so I'm gonna assign the city that it's in to that variable. So like in city, so in this case, like in Bethany, it is currently, and then I'm gonna do const temp is currently 10 degrees. So I just want to tell people what the temperature is in the city. So I need to assign to city and temp the correct slots from the response that we got. So for city, what key or what location is city in this payload?
Name,
Within which?
location.
Yeah, so location.name, yeah. So to get city, we'll do data.location.name. And then for temp, what path is that on? Yeah. So we'll do data.current.temp_f. So instead of just console logging up here, just the data, we'll do const message equals make message from weather data, pass it the data that we received, and then we'll console log the message. See if that was right. Hot dog, pretty cool. So, all right, so that's all we need from the weather part. Just based off what we want to do with it, we could be way more fancy, right? But that's good enough for now. So that's nice and good. Now we need to worry about the Slack piece. So if you were like, your boss is like, hey, can you send a message to me in Slack of the weather every morning? And you're like, I'm not gonna just do that. I'm gonna program that. So you're like, okay, I got the weather data. now I need to figure out how to send a message to Slack. And you've never done that before. You have no idea how to do that. And so all you do is say, and hey, I'm working, like, I'm not gonna go to the browser and do this. Like, I'm gonna write a script and then I'm gonna set something that runs that script every morning at 8 a.m. for me, which is very like, it's very common to like write a program and then just schedule it to run somewhere. It's like, we have servers running that are like listening for traffic on the internet, but we also will have servers running that just have a bunch of tasks that it runs on a certain schedule. So that's what we're gonna do. So we're running this in Node. And so typically you'll say Node, send, see, I searched this morning, but send Node, like, so that's literally what I did. Node, send message to Slack is what I typed. And then you just kind of see what you get. I hit the first result. And looked at that, but this actually ended up not being what I wanted. So I kind of read this and they're showing you examples of how to do it. And so this node module will send messages via webhooks. You guys haven't heard that term before, but it's a common thing you'll see for like whenever you're integrating with certain platforms, you'll often see this thing called webhook, which is like when something happens, it'll like call a URL, give it. I don't really, let's not worry too much about what that is, but it's just like a common thing you'll see whenever you're trying to like integrate with a certain system, you'll see that. So then I was like, okay, well, like, how do I get the webhook for Slack? And so I then went and searched Slack node webhook URL. And then I get Slack docs. And then I got this page, and then they were like, hey, use this package to send webhooks. And I was like, oh, okay, well, what is this package? Because now they're telling me to install this add Slack webhook, and then this is some other just like rando guy that made this, and it's only got 385 stars. It's used by a decent amount of people. But I was like, oh, like there's actually, so there's this repo, but then there's also like a Slack repo that they made. And so I was like, okay, well, what's add Slack webhook? So then I searched that. That's not what we want. So yeah, search what's add Slack webhook for node. Then I get this. Then I went to this npm repo. And then that has a link to GitHub. So I went to the GitHub because that's what I always prefer to go to. And then I got to this page and it's like, oh, here's the getting started tutorial. So, okay, let's look at that. And then you finally get to here and it's like, okay, here's what you need to do to start getting going. So this is like very common. Like when you're trying to do something you've never done before, you have to kind of like research and Google search and like you'll get to a page and you'll be like, this like little spidey sense. It's like, this isn't the right page. So I'm gonna go back. Like that's just you kind of develop that skill as a programmer. And so the first step is create a new app with Slack. And so I'm gonna go ahead and do that. And it's asking me to create a Slack app immediately, but we want to do this, like, so Slack apps are this way to do custom stuff for your Slack. But we only want to do this for OK coders, so we need to make sure that we're like creating an app in the correct Slack channel. So I had actually already done that this morning, so I made this one. So we're gonna click on that. And so you can basically, you're making an app and then you can give it like permissions for what it's allowed to do. And so you can see the different things you're allowed to do with it. And so I actually want this incoming webhooks thing. So post messages from external sources into Slack. That's like what we want to do. So we need to turn that. Okay, so it is on, I turned it on already. And then you can see them giving this example. So this is you'll see this sometimes when you're integrating with something where this is actually a command line command. Curl is a program for talking to the internet from the command line. So you'll see that. And this is saying make a post request and send this data to this URL. But we don't have a webhook URL yet, so we're going to create one. So like we're making a URL, which is going to be like specific to our Slack, where if I have the right API key, if I send a data to that URL, Slack's going to be listening to that URL and it's going to post in Slack for us the message we want to send. So we need to make that URL. Oh, come on. What do we have installed? So let me check that out. Remove that. Oh. There should be a deactivate
App
button
management settings.
right
Is that
there.
it, maybe?
Do what?
App management settings.
Come on. We're definitely keeping Giphy. Okay. There we go. There we go. There we go. Get out of here. Okay, so my custom app that I'm building, we have to give it permissions, because you don't want to just let it do like anything, you know? So we will just pick a channel, so we'll just do 2022 web dev. And then we'll just hit allow. So we now have this webhook URL. So like at this point, like we're recording this, it's like all of you are gonna see this and then just like, I mean, you can already post that channel, but you can do it.
You'll see if you understand it or not.
And then, yeah, that's true. I mean, maybe you should see all that. I'll put it. So, all right, I'm grabbing that URL and then I'm just gonna save it in the project real quick. So URL equals. And you can see it's like HTTPS hooks.slack.com/ and then gibberish, like just something that identifies our Slack channel and then our app probably kind of thing. So that's the URL. And you can see they're giving me, now that I made that webhook URL, they actually updated their example to include it. And then they're showing, okay, you guys don't know how to read this quite yet because I've used curl so much. I know that we're saying, hey, we're gonna send JSON.
Anybody who wants, we got some cookies from Auto Get for the Windows party. It's also champagne, but I can't give you that.
And then this data is JSON payload. This is the content type. And so we know whenever we talk to this webhook, we need to send it an object that has a text key with the value of it being what we want our message, right? So that means we're gonna do another fetch. But every time you've talked to the internet so far, it's always been a GET request typically. Like you go to pitchfork.com or NewYorkTimesCooking.com and that's a GET request to that URL. But whenever you actually use the site and you like type in information and hit submit or something like that, that for you is sending a post request to a URL. And a post request is basically saying, hey, we're giving you data that you should do something with. Whereas a GET request is like, hey, give me data. So you've used a post request before, but you just didn't really know it. And so fetch by default does a GET request to this URL, but you can modify fetch a little bit to do a post request. So let's write that function. So it's going to be an async function, and it'll be send message to Slack. And this will take as a parameter probably just the message, probably. And then we need to do, I mean, we can do the try catch stuff if we want to, but I'll just keep it simple and hope it doesn't. It's probably going to break actually, so maybe we should do try catch. So we'll do console.error e, and then we'll do const response equals wait fetch. And then you're like, hey, I don't know how to do a post request with fetch. And so what would you do? Fetch post requests.
You guys haven't picked up on it. Development is like 40% time on Google, 20% in the code, and then the rest of it's rebasing.
Yeah. So you can see here's the example. And so before, we just did await fetch and gave it a URL, but that like by default has a lot of options that it just uses by default. So if we want to customize it, we give it a second parameter with a configuration object, which says, hey, we want to do a post request. And the data we're sending, you have to tell the server what format the data is in. And so we're saying, hey, the data is JSON. And then the body is the data. So that's the other piece. Like when we do a post request, there's a URL, there's the format the data's in, and then there's the data itself. And so and we have to stringify it.
Is that accept header required or wait for?
No, I don't know why that's there. It's probably nice to have.
I've never seen that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. There's like as you're like becoming a developer, you, like if you're at like a meetup or something and someone's speaking about something and you're like, I have no idea what the words this person, I don't know what they're saying. And you're like, that's so bad. I gotta go home and look all this stuff up. And then eventually you like have been doing it for a while and you're still like, I don't know what this person's saying, but like it doesn't matter. Because I know I don't need to know that, you know, like it's not a big deal. And then like seeing something like this, I was just like, yeah, I don't think that, you know, like, I don't think you need that. And like, I'm not like freaking out about it, you know. All right, so I'm gonna copy this here. And put it here. All right, so this URL should be our webhook URL, right, up here? So webhook URL. Devin did the good thing that you'll see developers do by convention, which is like if it's a really big deal of a URL, and then like, you know, like do all caps like this. It's just convention, it doesn't actually change anything. So I could change this to be, you know, like that, but let's not worry about it. And then, yeah, method post, we'll get rid of this header just to be snarky. And then our body will be a JSON stringify of the payload that we're supposed to send to Slack. And that, remember, in our thing here was, hey, it should be an object with text key with the message. So we just need to do object text, and the text will be the message that we pass in. So I'll put message right here. Okay, so we've got an asynchronous thing that goes and talks to the weather, and then we have another asynchronous thing that sends a message to Slack. And so we kind of need to like chain them together. So we need to do one that awaits getting the message and then one that awaits sending it to Slack. And so I'm going to make a function that's like get weather and send to Slack. And that'll be an async function as well. And now we need, so before with get weather data, all we did was console log it. But we like need to get it back from it. We don't want to just log it to the console, like we need it to send to Slack. So how do I modify this function to actually give me the data that I need? Simple answer. How do you give back data from a function? Yeah. So yeah, return message. Oh, message. So this totally works. Like it is asynchronous, but it can still return something. And if it fails, it just isn't going to return anything. And then send message to Slack doesn't actually need to return anything in this case. So we may need to console log, because Slack's going to respond with something that's like, hey, I did it successfully or I didn't potentially. So we can console log that and see what we get. All right, so I'm gonna make a main function that sort of chains this stuff together. And that's the one we're gonna run for the full scope of our program. So it will get the weather data. And then we will send message to Slack with the message. Now, who knows what's wrong with this code at the moment? Probably does.
Katie, I don't have any.
No. Yeah.
Code anymore.
I was going kind of fast, but let's just look at this function here. So this is not a synchronous function, right? Because it's talking to the internet. And we have to await getting the response and await getting the JSON payload from it. And then we return the message. So this whole function is asynchronous. And this is the function. So this function gets the weather data and makes the message and then returns the message. So that's what that whole function does.
Did the class already covered synchronous and asynchronous?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is this a race condition?
Well, so hold on, let me just change this a little bit. So we're not calling get weather data at the beginning of the program. We're calling get weather and send to Slack. This function calls that get weather data function. So get weather data asynchronously, gets the weather data, makes the message, returns the message. So when I straight up just call that function, the return type of it, what do you guys think the return type of the return signature of that function is? Boolean number string. So it is sort of a string, but remember it's not synchronous. So if this was a synchronous function, get weather data, and we called it and it returned a string, like we can just immediately assign that to a variable like we're doing here, and that variable would be a string. But it's not synchronous, it's going and talking on the internet. And so whenever we've seen stuff that isn't synchronous, it's asynchronous, and we have to work with it a little differently because it's what type. If you're dealing with asynchronicity, what's the thing, the API we've seen we have to use for dealing with that? There's async await, but then there's like the actual thing that async await is working with. It's called what? Promise, the promise API. So this is that the type, you can actually, oh, the answer was there the whole time. So the type is promise of string. It's not actually string, it's a promise of a string. And so because we're not, remember I was like promises like kind of stink in the raw form, so we use async await, but async await is just like this like nice syntax for dealing with promises. So we have to do what? Like just like we did up here to do it in this format. Because it's a promise, you would have to do like .then, but we want to use async await. So how do I modify this line so that message is actually going to be a string?
So are you like await before the function would
Yeah.
not work or? Oh, okay.
Exactly.
I thought you were saying we need to do something.
Exactly. Yeah. So then we can send the message to Slack and give it the message, which will be string rather than promise of string. And like, because this is like the last thing we want to do, we don't need to do anything with it. Like we don't have to await that one. We could, but like it's going to send the message and then we're just going to console log the response or the error. And we don't need to do anything else with it. That's sort of like the end of the chain. So there's, I mean, we could certainly have it return something and await and accept that and then console log that, but it's kind of up to you at this point. All right, so let's run it. Oh, shit. It works. I cannot believe that worked the first time. Oh, yeah, so here's the app. No, and like seriously, like it's never works the first time, yeah. So yeah, that's pretty tight, right? That's pretty cool. So yeah, that's like I think a cool example of use case for backend programming, for stuff you would do just with Node. Like there's no browser involved in this, right? Except for like displaying it, like we're seeing it, but like all that work was done on a server somewhere, and in this case, just my computer, but not the browser on my computer, like just my computer. All right, so we've got 10 minutes left. I want to kind of give you guys a sneak peek of the next module, which is React. With React, the reason we use it is to solve the like kind of verbose, kind of nasty nature of just using the raw document web API for manipulating the DOM. So we saw the like document.get element by ID, and then like add event listener, and then like if you wanted to inject HTML into the page, that's where it gets really nasty. So the get element by ID and the add event listener, that's not so bad. I could live with that. The moment that you're trying to like inject HTML into the page to like customize it, so you're getting user information and you're injecting their data into it, or you're getting the to-dos that they have and you're injecting the to-dos into the page, like that got really nasty and people hated that format. And so like updating like an underlying API of the web is a bigger deal than just writing a framework or a library that just still uses that API, but like the way that you actually write the code is like cleaner, and then it like takes care of doing the nasty stuff for you. So React is a library or framework for writing web apps that's just way cleaner than using the underlying API directly. So we're going to learn that framework. It's one of the most popular front-end frameworks. The other two you'll typically hear are Angular or Vue. And they do the exact same thing as React, but just in a different style. Some people like Angular more, some people like Vue more. I like React the most, and it's the most popular one in terms of usage. And it's used quite a bit here in Oklahoma City. Okay, so we'll start. So the purpose of right now is not for you guys to necessarily learn anything quite yet. I just kind of want you guys to see like some of the setup of it and just kind of see it running. So create React app is what everybody uses to get started with React and to create like a template starter project. So you can see their documentation here. So like they're trying to sell you on it on this page. It's like, set up modern web app by running one command. And you don't need to learn to configure a bunch of stuff. It auto reloads and just lets you focus on development. So that's kind of their pitch. And they're showing here's how you do it. So whenever you see something like this, it should kind of tip you off. This is a command line thing. And then you can see them kind of showing you a little bit of stuff over here. So this is going to create a project called My App. So the command is, so npx is this like, you have npx installed, just like you have npm installed. Npx is just this like slightly different thing than npm that you'll use often to run a command that installs something, but then doesn't actually like install something in your computer globally. So just don't worry about that too much. You'll see npx sometimes when you need to run a command. You'll see npm more often than you will npx. So npx and then create React app is the command that we give to npx. And then my app is an argument to that command for the name of the project that you want. Because it's going to make a folder. So it's going to use that as the name of the folder. basically. And then there's gonna be a bunch of stuff inside the folder that are all specific to React. So I'm gonna run this command. So I need to do it in the correct spot. And so I don't want to do this inside the node weather Slack. I want to go up a directory. And I do want to do this inside day 8. And then, so I wanted to make a new folder inside day 8, which is going to be the React app. And so I paste that command and then I just pick the name of it. So like first, okay, coders, React app, perfectly fine. So you just hit enter. And so if you're ever going to create a React app, I didn't know I was running 12. Wow. So like, this is being nice. Okay, you're running node 12. You should be running node 14 or higher. Please update your version of node. So I have something called NVM, which is Node Version Manager. And I want to know which. Okay, so I have 12 installed, 14 and 16. And so to switch to a different version, I say NVM use probably just 16. Yeah, so now if I do node V, it's going to give me 16.5. So now I can run that npx framework. So you'll sometimes see, so this is a terminal program that's asking me questions. So I just have to give it an answer. So it's saying, is it okay to proceed? And then if you want to proceed, hit type Y and then hit enter. That's what that means. And so it's doing a bunch of stuff that you don't need to worry about understanding or anything. I mean, I don't understand most of it either. It's just what you do. All right, it's giving me like a notice about new NPM version available. Don't have to necessarily worry about that. But you can see after it ran, it spit out a bunch of stuff. I mean, to ignore all this, but it is saying, hey, success, we did it. Here, just so you know, inside the directory we just made, because it made a new folder, so we need to move to that folder. Inside there, these commands are available to you. So npm start is not available to you everywhere. It's available to you inside a project that has that command find, and Create React App does. So they're saying, hey, if you want to just start doing development, this is the command you run to just start doing development. And then build and test and inject are more advanced commands that you don't need to worry about as a junior dev. So build, for example, bundles the app into static files for production. So you'd only run build if you're someone on the team that's responsible for deploying code to production, which is usually not a junior dev or even like a middle range dev. It's usually a senior dev that sets it up once and then it automatically happens. So the only command you need to know is npm start. And so we suggest that you begin by cding into the directory and doing npm start. So I'll do that. So I'll cd into first okcoders React app. And by the way, like if they hadn't spat all that out, you can still find out the commands that are available to you in the package JSON. So the package JSON has the dependencies and the commands. So if we look at first OK Coders React, here's that folder. There's a bunch of stuff that Create React App put in here for me. One of them is the package JSON. You can see some of the dependencies in the scripts, and here's the commands you can run. It's all defined in the package JSON. So start's the one we want to run. So I'm going to do npm start. And so this is the live server thing for React. So it's opening it up in the browser. It was compiling, and then now it's got just this basic template. And it's like, hey, look, we've got the sample project for you, edit app.js to start changing it. And so let's just take a quick peek at what's in here. So there's a source folder and complicated projects that have a bunch of stuff. Typically, the stuff at the root is like configuration and stuff you don't modify that much. And then the actual code of the project is in a source folder. So you'll see that a lot. And then here's the actual code. So we've got a CSS file, a JavaScript file, a test file, which we're not going to learn about testing in this whole bootcamp. Another CSS file, a JS file, so a bunch of JavaScript. And then there's a public folder, and in there's actually an index.html. You can look at that, it's going to be a lot of, actually it's not that complicated. So there's a root HTML that has the title React app, but there's like nothing else. There's just this div with ID root. And React, when you write React, you're actually writing JavaScript. And it then, like whenever it runs in the browser, it document.gets element by ID this root, and then injects all the HTML into that div. Like all the HTML in a React app is created from JavaScript. So this is the only HTML file that you have. And then everything else you write in source. And so there's this index.js that does exactly what I just said. It document.gets element by ID root, and then it renders the entire app in there. And so this is just a special syntax for React that looks like HTML, but it's actually JavaScript, or it's actually JavaScript. So if we want to change this page, it's in source app.js. So we can go to app.js. You can see there's this JavaScript-y, HTML-y looking thing going on here. And, you know, we can change it. We can do edit and then save it, auto refresh. And so, yeah, React is this really cool thing that kind of like combines JavaScript and HTML into one file, but it's all JavaScript. And you can see like, yeah, we have a function that's returning HTML. It's kind of what it looks like. But then there's all this special React syntax that we'll learn in the next module that lets you do all the stuff that we've done so far, but just in a cleaner, easier to read way. So yeah, any questions or anything? Cool. All right. You just did the hardest module. Usually there's like only like 5 to 10 people left after this module. So this cohort's been great. Yeah. So good job. Clap, clap, clap. Pat on the back. And I hope to see you all for the next module.
This one?
Yeah.
Is that what the calendar said? Is it not start till?
I think at 15.
We're off the 4th and the 11th.
If that's what you guys want, that's fine. I figure, yeah, so I'll talk with Claire. If that's the schedule she put up, that's fine. But usually we just take a week and a half. But so we're not starting till 15th. That's a Sunday. Oh, I'm looking at May. Sorry. Okay, I'll talk with Claire and find out more about that. And I don't know, maybe we can do a survey. If you guys want some more time off, that's not a big deal. But if you want to keep rolling, we'll just see what everyone prefers and do that. All right. Going to coffee and code at 8th Street Market if anybody else is going. All right, you guys enjoy your long weekend.
Thanks, Zach.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.